Anita Walker, Executive Director of the Mass Cultural Council, and welcome to our Culture Chat today. I am delighted to have Allyn Burrows, who has just flown into the screen, and there is Tina Packer. You know, when we do these, everybody is becoming their own broadcaster, technology expert, and some of us are in thin internet land, and we've done almost 20 of these, and we pull them off every time, and there you are, and I'm so glad to see your faces. Tina Packer and Allyn Burrows from Shakespearean Company. Thank you so much for being part of our chat today.
Thanks for having us, Anita.
And Tina, I need you to unmute, push that little unmute button so that we will be able to hear you. Let's see, how's it sound now?
I don't know where it is.
There it is. You got it.
Oh, I've been unmuted by you. Okay, great. Can you hear me now, Anita?
Well, yes. And you know what? There's a lot of forgiveness these days as we're all trying to figure out how to make everything work. Well, we're so happy to have you, and I'm really excited to have part of this conversation. But let me start out, Tina, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I feel a bit like a fraud, actually, to tell you the truth, because I got the virus. I guess it must have been a month ago now, and I had a horrid week, which I can't remember much about. And then I was lying there in hospital, and I thought, this is a really boring way to die. And then I thought, but I know how to breathe. So I started doing my voice exercises, and all things were well. I started getting better at that moment.
Saved by theater. Oh, this is a great story.
Well, you know, I don't know whether it was, but I do know how to put my breath right down into my groin area, if I might say so, and really use my lungs. And I feel as if I started getting better from then on, you know.
Well, you know, we are earlier this year, pre-coronavirus, launched what we called Culture RX, which is really the intersection of the arts and health. And I think you are exhibit A now in the midst of the coronavirus of the arts and health being intricately connected. Yeah. Allyn, how are you think that Shakespearean Company? Allyn, how are you?
We're well. I'm well. You've got me in my bunker here, Anita. This is where you know, I'm in my wood shop. This is where I do all my business now. Is I can tinker while I talk. So I won't be working on anything while I'm talking to you. But we all find ourselves on about 6 or 7 hours a day of Zoom meetings. Trying to make sense of it all and make a plan for going forward, and kind of keep people connected, and making sure that everyone's both physical and mental health is in a good place, because it's, you know, our company is made up of people who are a lot of type A's, and they are used to churning those wheels and getting things done. And when that has to pull up short, then oftentimes we don't know what to do with ourselves. So, but there's plenty to do still as we look forward. So,
but something tells me you find the way. So Tina, I was thinking about you as this coronavirus was hitting, even before I knew that you yourself had been affected by this terrible, terrible, terrible disease. But I was thinking back to sort of the beginning of the Me Too movement, and you had written and spoken extensively about Shakespearean times and the Bard, and sort of a women's rights element to a lot of the storytelling there. And I thought, something tells me that this pandemic we're going through, frankly, there's probably nothing we could ever go through that doesn't have a through line back to Shakespeare. Is there one now?
Yeah, no, Anita, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is our first kind of pandemic, but Shakespeare and his company had them all the time. I mean, the plague was an ever-present danger. And so when Shakespeare first joined the theatre company, you know, we called the Lord Chamberlain's Men at that time, they had a terrible year in 92. They had a terrible year, 1592, this is. In 1592 and 1593, they had to go out on the road. And of course, you know, at least they could go out on the road, but only with half the company. So 6 or 7 people went out on the road and toured, but they didn't earn any of the money that they should. And then they came back again. And then the next big one, I think, was in 1604, or was it 1603, Alan? I can't remember, but it was huge again. And they all had to stop working, because if there were 30 deaths in London, the whole place went into lockdown. And so no public assemblies, no meeting, the same as we're doing now, that they try to keep away from each other as much as possible. And it drew the economy to a halt. Although I do have to say, it wasn't as bad as it was in the Middle Ages, when, you know, in the 1300s, the whole of Europe got it, and it killed off nearly half the population, and they really did have an economic collapse, which they didn't recover from for, 10, 20 years. So, this is not a new thing. It's just that we've forgotten, in a way, I just want to say, it bred such fear in them. They'd think, who's responsible for this? So, they'd do these awful pogroms against the Jews. Then they'd think it was God's will that they should have this epidemic, and God was angry with them. And some people start saying, no, it's miasma in the air, but at least they had the idea that it was a germ. And then, of course, they realized it came from the rats, and so they killed off all the dogs and cats so that they wouldn't catch it from the rats. But of course, the dogs and cats were what caught the rats, and so they doubled the epidemic. It has a history. It has a history, and especially for our profession.
Well, so before I move on to you, to extract some of what we can learn from the bar, isn't it nice when things have happened before we could possibly learn from them? I want to speak to, we have quite a few people joining us in the conversation today, and we really want you to be a part of it. So for those of you who may be new Zoomers, I don't know if there are any new Zoomers left, but there is a little button down there at the bottom of your laptop that says Q&A, and I would ask you, please push that button, send us a question, send us a comment, share us a story, be part of the conversation with us for the next half hour. Allyn, there's something we can actually learn and apply from the plagues of Shakespearean times. Have we got that? Allyn looks a bit frozen now, so I'll let you take that one, Tina.
Well, of course, it's in Romeo and Juliet. It's the play where it is in very clearly. If you remember, the friar's letter to Romeo telling him that Juliet's not really dead, he's just got her in a deep sleep, so everybody thinks she's dead. That letter got nailed up in the house where the priests were living, and because if somebody in the house got the plague, they nailed the whole house up, and everybody in the house, usually that meant everybody in the house died, but you couldn't go out because they'd locked you in. And that's why Romeo never gets the letter from the friar saying, Juliet's alive, don't kill yourself. And so that's the place where it appears. But there are several other times when there's famine or things like that, and often famines were created by the plague because nobody could sow the harvest, which meant that there was no harvest the next year. So that it winds in and out of this kind of and of course, Allyn's can probably quote you a lot, but there's a lot of a plague on whatever, that people curse people with the plague. Oh yes, 12th night. I forgot what it is, Allyn. A plague on these pickled herrings. That's right.
I don't think we're cursing at the coronavirus, but I've yet to hear someone use it as an attack on a person verbally.
Yes.
As you were talking before, though, Tina, I was just thinking when you were talking about people, the lockdown. I mean, 600 years ago, we were locking people down as our protection, and we're doing that today. uh, what are some other similarities of the way we responded, we, the collective we, 400 years
Yeah.
ago or 600 years ago to now?
Well, I think for some of us, you know, I think Will Shakespeare probably went out on the road once or twice, but I think when it happened again, like in 1603, he probably just retired to one. So all the rich people left town, you know, the plague, they were out of there to their country houses. But I do think that Shakespeare probably left town with them. And there's a report of him staying at Wilton House, for instance. And I think he probably wrote his plays, you know, oh my God, I don't have to act every afternoon, you know, and learn my lines in the evening. And I think he probably wrote in the morning, my God, I can write all day. And so you actually do see, you know, his input. In fact, his great plays come around 1604, 1605, 1606. You know, that's Macbeth. We've just had Hamlet, but you know, it's those big, and I think he probably just took off to the country, maybe even back to Stratford-on-Avon, and wrote the plays. So it might have been you know, a plus for the rest of us that he didn't go out on the road, that he actually was writing. But I think the other thing, I mean, I know what happens to me, Anita, is I'm reading all the time. I'm one of those people that buys books. Oh, that fits in with that thinking, and I buy books. And so what happens is I've been reading day and night because and increasing my knowledge. And I think that what happened to especially the theaters there, you know, they were very bright, those actors. They were businessmen, and it was a new art form, creating theater, and we've lived off it pretty much ever since. But they also were into science. So a lot of them got into trouble, like Marlowe, and because they started saying science is really important, and that they were saying maybe God doesn't exist, and they were getting into trouble, you know, for saying things like that. But Edward Allyn, who was one of the chief actors, there were two big stars, Burbage and Allyn. Well, he went off and stopped doing theatre and created a school and insisted that science was part of the curriculum. And that's the first time that ever happened. So, you know, I feel as if the actors were really working hard on themselves and being very conscious themselves and bringing more things to consciousness. I don't think you should just think of them as a kind of they weren't just hanging about. They were actually trying to deepen the conversation all the time.
I think what you're saying just convinces me more than ever that if history doesn't repeat, it certainly does rhyme. And I'm hearing a lot of rhyming from the stories
Yes.
you're telling. Allyn, you've returned.
Yeah.
You're in your bunker.
Yeah, sorry, I got bumped off for some reason. I'm back.
We're glad you're back.
I answered your question.
Yes, Tina she did very, very well. But I wanted to ask you, Allyn, as you think about Shakespeare and Company moving forward, is part of your strategy and thinking sort of grounded in Shakespeare himself and what happened during the plague?
Yeah, I mean, we've always thought that we view the world around here through Shakespeare's prism. And now we view Shakespeare through the world's prism. We've turned that around 180 degrees. So how do we look at Shakespeare in this current context? And how do we take this current environment and have it inform what it is that we do? The clues are all there in his text, much like his stage directions are all embedded in his text. If you just read them carefully enough, they don't all say exit pursued by bear, but they're in there. And so we, you know, we're taking a very methodical, practical approach about how we can do this. You know, basically where this work is at its best is when it's done on a bare stage with emphasis on the text and the relationships and the actor-audience relationship. So if you use that as a foothold and a springboard, that's what we keep coming back to, and not get too worked up about what we don't have. You know, I was also artistic director of Actors Shakespeare Project this last decade, and I always said to people there, remember to embrace our limitations, and that's try to do here. You know, work within the parameters that we're given. If we have restrictions, well, you know, don't spend a lot of time bemoaning the fact that we have restrictions. Just find what the guidelines are and work within them. And sometimes they get very constrained, but you know, when you look back at how immediate these maladies must have been for Shakespeare and his contemporaries, the fact that, you know, there was no plumbing, that sewage ran in the streets, that, you know, fights broke out and people walked around armed all the time. And you know, I know people do now in many parts of the world, but we're not all entirely used to it. So, and so that there was an immediacy to it that that we haven't come up to yet. We have led, we've gotten to a place of comfort and privilege, and we have to remind ourselves that Shakespeare was living in a different environment, and we can still learn those lessons from him about what it is to be human on a basic level, on an immediate level with each other. And that's really about respecting each other, valuing each other's presence, and listening to each other.
You know, Tina, along those lines about embracing what we can do as opposed to what we can't do, so much of what I'm hearing that is disturbing and difficult for people to cope with is the uncertainty and ambiguity of the time we live in. I mean, what does Shakespeare tell us about navigating this murky, we don't know what's tomorrow, what's today? How did Shakespeare deal with that?
Listen, Anita, never mind Shakespeare. What about us? I mean, when you think about Shakespeare and Company, you know, I know you've known us for a long time, but 45 years, we have had so many ups and downs, so many, my God, how are we going to meet payroll next week? You know, we've had so many times when it wasn't until year 19 that we didn't go off for payroll for some time during the year because we didn't have any money and we just sign on unemployment and go back to work, you know. So and part of me, when I was lying there in the bloody hospital thinking, are we going to be done in by a virus? You know, after we've been relatively stable, but it's not that we're not unused to a life of oh my God, you know, how are we going to put this together? I think that's true of all the arts until you get to kind of the BSO level or something like that. Are you there still? Oh, yes. So I think what happened, I think, you know, maybe what's happened to us is that we have actually learned more deeply to care for each other. And when I said, you know, awful things happened when the plague broke out, not so much in Shakespeare's time, but in the Middle Ages, you know, and they set off these massive pogroms against the Jews mainly. That hatred for other people and deciding they're responsible for it. You see it in glimmers in our life, you know. I mean, the men with huge guns. I think, what are they doing? Are they saying they'll blow us all to kingdom come if we don't do what they say? I mean, those you know. But Shakespeare did deal with a lot of that violence in the early plays like Titus Andronicus and the Henry VIs. And where he came out was that you've got to turn that violence, will you, nill you, into some kind of love and redemption, that just killing people doesn't help, you know. And I think that message of finding a way to really understand each other is the art form of theatre. That's what we're trying to do all the time. We're working to understand, you know, consciously how other people operate. And of course, for actors, we have a front row seat because we're actually trying to take on every level of person, you know, whether it's warrior or lover, but everything in between, you know, mother, father, all the things. So I think we have as actors, we actually have a real plus on how to love other people, because we're always playing weird people.
Well, and absolutely one of the exemplary, aside from the amazing theater craft that you do at
Yeah.
Shakespeare and Company, your work with youth, and using theater as a way to develop empathy and understanding. Allyn, I have to say, and we, as I said, we've done many of these chats, and these are supposed to be a nice, cool drink of water at 1 o'clock in the afternoon while we're all, fending off the demons that seem to be coming from this way and that, and really sort of a discussion about the resilience of our field. But I mean, you two seem the most authentically upbeat and happy of just about anybody that I've had a chance to chat with for a while. And is it because you do really carry the long view working with the text of the bar?
Well, we've spent a lot of time with our face in the dirt, working outside, sword fighting, and when you have that visceral experience of it, then to be able to put one foot in front of the other so that you can carry on. I think artists in general have that appreciation for the basic elements and how to build on them from the ground up. And the same is true with actors. There's a real misconception about actors, is that they're oft pampered and undisciplined and challenging to work with. Those are only the ones who get all the attention. Meanwhile, you see all those actors who are very disciplined, put in their craft, are tough as nails, and get what it is that they're meant to be doing out there. And so yeah, I mean, we're taking it one step at a time too. I mean, we don't, Tina and I get together, we do a lot of laughing anyway, so that's what you're seeing.
But Anita, I want to say something about Allyn, because he won't say it himself. I have to say he's one of the most practical people I know. And as soon as this hit, we were right in the front of the thing for the small business loan, working with our bank, and that's Allyn. So and Adam, our managing director, but the drive comes from Allyn. And he was organizing us on the day practically that it came down. And so it's not that and then one of our benefactors helped us as well and matched our loan. So we knew we were going to be able to pay everybody for a while. Now that doesn't mean to say we're not going to go into terrible straits because we have no money coming in, but I just want to say it's Allyn's practicality. And yes, he's an actor, and yes, he's a director, but my God, he's practical and does so. I just don't want him not to get some real acknowledgement for that, and getting
not mutually exclusive concepts: practicality, acting, and creativity. I want to go to some of the questions that have come in. This one is from Carlos Reg Plaza, who writes, "Can you think of anyone in Shakespeare's work that's comparable to Trump?" And then says, "Sending love to Los Angeles, loving this talk. Thanks for doing it." Any ideas? Who's that
God.
character?
Well, early on, Bob Kuttner of American Prospect, I did an interview with him, and he kept wanting me, and this was early on, Trump had just been elected, and he kept wanting me to compare Trump to one of Shakespeare's villains. And I said, I think Trump is much more like Juliet, because he's always calling from the balcony, and he just wants to be loved. Rude, he just really wants to be loved.
He's dissing and Juliet.
So I think I did say it's he's not a Richard III. He's not a Macbeth. He's not,
he's Jack Cade. Allyn, he's Jack Cade.
Yeah,
most people don't know Jack Cade, but he's in Henry VI Part 2, and he does the same bragging and lying, and you know, that's where first thing we'll do, let's kill all the lawyers comes in.
No, that's just the butcher
So,
who said that.
yeah,
It was just
well,
the butcher
anyway,
who says, let's kill all the lawyers.
but that's where it comes. And so, and Jack Cade is that braggart who rouses up a huge rebellion, you know, but then he does get put down. But of course, Trump kept on going. But in character, he's most like Jack Cade. And unfortunately, most people don't know Jack Cade. So, you know.
Well, they did. I
But
played Jack Cade, and Tina directed me as Jack Cade in Henry VI Part 2.
All right, Jack or Juliet, we'll leave it to weigh in. Send us on for Q&A. Is it Jack or Juliet? Couple other things here. One comment from Teresa Morrow, back to the beginning of our conversation about a plague upon you. She said, I'm thinking of a person, she could say, a COVID on you too. So, you know, who knows, that might get into the vernacular. And then Ann Petrocelli, who is my wonderful assistant and helps us set up these programs, writes, Tina, so glad you recovered and are well. Thank you for highlighting the importance of breath and breathing exercises. Any tips or resources for newbies who might want to learn some breathing exercises to try at home?
Yes, first of all, be comfortable, be in a chair, you know, sitting back, spine going up to the ceiling, but make sure the breath drops right down into the body and follow your natural breathing patterns so that you're freeing the natural voice and the natural breath, and then start expanding on those. So, and if you find you get stuck in the throat or the chest, just gently ask the breath to release a little lower to the diaphragm and then a little lower to the groin area, so that you're asking the breath to do that. You're not forcing it to do it. So the body then starts going at its own rhythm and its own capabilities. So, you know, when I was, the breathing was difficult. I didn't ever force my breathing, but every moment it started opening up a bit more and a bit more, you know. So that's it is following the natural rhythms and don't force anything, but do encourage it to go to great depths.
And I want you to know that
in the vein of being practical, I just want to say, there's no guarantee that breathing will cure you of COVID.
No, but it'll help.
Well, it definitely helped Tina. And Tina, my assistant, leads us all at the Mass Cultural Council in stretching and breathing exercises a couple of times a week to help us get through this. Allyn, I want you to put your prescient glasses on and sort of tell us what you think the reopening of theater is going to look like, both at Shakespearean Company and sort of writ large.
Right. Well, as you heard Governor Cuomo say the other day, the theaters would be in phase 4 of New York's reopening. Obviously, you know, when I talk to the staff, I say we have to consider things either BV or AV. BV is before a vaccine and AV is after a vaccine. We will go back into the theaters when we are told that it is safe to go back into the theaters. There's a lot of speculation about what we can and can't do before we're told that it's safe to go back into the theaters. I feel like that's a lot of energy to devote it to something that we can't really get a foothold or traction on. That being said, right now, you know, theaters, we can't gather for more than 10 people, right? So that does not kind of make for a community. Theater is community, theater is a conversation. So really what we're doing is getting kind of some programming in place in the event that suddenly the skies open and we see daylight on this thing, and we can start to open gradually. Golf courses just opened up. We're given permission today to open. I don't think we're next on the list after golf courses, but you know, we have lots of outdoor theaters. We have 4 outdoor theaters that we work from, and you know, when we get the go ahead, if we can make people feel comfortable with proper social distancing. We're all trained to speak outdoors and be heard and understood. And so that may be one route that we take when we get the all clear, but we're not making any immediate plans until we get that all clear.
And Tina, one other thing that, and thank you for that, Allyn. Actually, one of our listeners asked a question about outdoor theater, and you answered it before I even had a chance to read you the question. But Tina, do you think, and how much, to what extent is our trusted relationship with audiences going to be incredibly important in bringing audiences back to the theater?
Well, I think obviously, I believe it is. I think that people who go to the theater, you know, they love the ritual of going into the theater. They love the exchange. They love the physical feeling of being amongst other people, and that you can always turn to your, even if you don't know them, and start talking about the play. You know, the people next to you, and that you're generating ideas as well as, and for me, it's actually even the generating of energy between the actors and the audience themselves. In other words, that the actors are saying, look at me. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. They're saying, this is what we're talking about. Let's all thinking about this at this moment. And that energy is really community building. And my instinct is that people will eventually flock back to the theaters, but I don't think that the fear factor has to go away as well, or you know, that the idea that you actually can be in the presence of another person and it not be a dangerous thing to be. I mean, you can't underestimate the fear factor. Down here in the Berkshires, we're pretty good. Everybody wears their mask. Everybody keeps 6 feet away. The supermarkets let us in bit by bit, and everybody kind of, you know, plays the game and without resentment. And that feeling of we're all in this, you know, doing it together, actually is a wonderful feeling. And that's really the feeling of theatre. We're igniting our imaginations in theatre is what we're doing collectively. And well, you do that in music and all those things as well. But for theatre, we actually are saying, look, this is about ideas and feelings and emotions. Join in, you know. So I actually feel very optimistic about the theatres coming back. And again, I go back to the long term. The theatres have always come back. This is not such a bad plague as it was in the Middle Ages or in Shakespeare's time. So, you know, it is a bad plague, but we, you know, I feel, you know, Shakespeare, well, all theatre came back with a vengeance. Every time they could, they were back in there, and it built and built. So I feel optimistic about it, Anita. What do you think? I mean, are you optimistic about it? You know an awful lot about it.
Well, thanks for asking. I'm incredibly optimistic. I know that financial devastation and just the feeling of our doors are closed, just the mourning and grief over not being able to present the programming that has been planned and imagined and worked so hard on. But I keep saying, you know, actors will act, musicians will make music, artists will make art. You cannot stop that. It cannot be stopped. It is a force of nature. It's like oxygen and food, and it will exist. It will happen. It may be presented in different formats, in different ways, in different settings even, but we will always have our arts. Allyn, I'll give the last word to you.
Yeah, I have shifted my feeling about the fear factor. I think once we get assurances that we can gather collectively, because theater is a shared experience, we will all come back in force, because that we will have the ability to do so, because it will be safe and we'll be back.
Thank you both. Thank you for being here. And if all else fails, just think it's so much better than the Middle Ages. Thank you for sharing that idea. I'm gonna just noodle on that for today.
We all smell so much better now, Anita.
Yes, we do.
Allyn, Burrows, and Tina Packer. Becker, Shakespeare and Company. Thank you so much for being part of our chat today. Stay well.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.